Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. You're here for our February instalment of our Breakfast Briefing series. While we just wait for everybody to join, if you could just grab a coffee, take a pause, and while people are entering the session, do introduce yourselves in the chat. Say hello, the organisation you're from. We'd love to know who we have here and who's joining us. We've got lots of people joining. I can see them spilling in. You won't be able to, but do introduce yourselves in the chat and say hi while we just wait. I'll give us probably 30 more seconds and then I'll kick us off because we have a lot to cover in our 1 hour session today. So as you're joining, thanks very much and welcome everybody. We are about to kick off our session today on demystifying sustainability reporting and disclosure. And while everybody's joining, do feel free to pop your name and where you're from in our chat and introduce yourselves while we kick off. So I'm going to start us off and make sure that we maximize our hour. As any final people join in, they can just catch up. So welcome today. Thanks very much for joining us. A quick overview for you. Here is our agenda up on the screen. What you're going to hear from today first is our Head of Impact Development, Ro Egglesfield. She's going to inform and educate you on sustainability reporting and disclosure today. At Seismic, we take pride in our human-first approach, and this is a really complex topic that can often feel overwhelming. So I hope that we're going to demystify it for you. There's a lot going on in this space, and we can't cover everything as it constantly changes in this world in the hour we have today. But what we do hope we'll do is create some calm for you, help you on your reporting journey. We're promising not too many acronyms because you'll find it's a very acronym-filled world. And then once Ro has taken you through a brief overview of this landscape, she'll then lead a fireside chat with two members of our community that we've invited to join us today. So we'll be welcoming Mark Brown, who is Sustainability and Impact Manager at Motability Operations, and Joe Fackler, who's Manager of the Impact Management Platform. And Ro is going to have a panel session with them. We've got some great questions that they'll be answering and sharing their direct experiences of reporting within businesses. And after that, we're going to finish up with a Q&A session. So I'll come back on screen and any questions that you have during this session, please pop them in the chat as we go through. Just drop them in. We'll be monitoring them and then we'll pull some out and ask our panel of Ro, Mark and Joe at the end. So any burning questions that arise as we go through, do just pop them into the chat. So I'm going to really quickly tell you a little bit about Seismic and who we are before handing over to Ro. We're a sustainability advisory across all areas of sustainability. We have B Corp experts, we have ESG strategists, we have communications specialists, of which I am one. I'm our head of communications here at Seismic. And we have net zero advisors, and we also have reporting experts, of course, of which you're hearing from Ro today. We have a whole host of clients across various sizes and sectors, B2B, B2C, tech, consumer, and this is just a small snapshot for you to just give you an idea of some of the mix of the community that you might be joining with on today's session. And then just finally touching base on the various services that we offer here at Seismic, helping businesses on their sustainability journey. We cover on the top left over there, ESG strategy, which is around optimizing your sustainability performance with an ongoing action plan. We are B Corp specialists with over 60 collective years of experience in our team, and I'm always super proud of the number of B Impact assessments, which is the online assessment that you go through to become B Corp. We've gone through over 800 BIAs as a business. We also offer capacity building as a service to our clients, which is bespoke support to equip our partners with the skills and processes that they need to implement reporting in their business. And then communications, which, as I said, is the part of our business that I head up, which is really about giving the broader expertise that we have in sustainability, bridging that gap into how you communicate it to your stakeholders and, crucially, avoid greenwashing. And then finally, we offer net zero measurement and target setting and carbon footprinting. And then finally, reporting and disclosure, which is the topic that we will be covering today. So before I hand over to Ro, we just wanted to run a brief poll where we're asking you to share where you're at in your reporting and disclosure cycle. So if you could pop in the chat, and pop in the poll, it should pop up automatically on screen for you. Click a 1 if you're in early stage, like really don't know where to start, a bit overwhelmed by the landscape. A 2 if you're developing, but it's still mostly reactive to whatever legislation is coming at you. Or number 3, that your business is quite mature, you're proactive in understanding and extracting the value from reporting frameworks, just so that we can understand what we have in the room and get a picture today. So while you're filling that in, I'm just going to introduce you to the wonderful Ro, who, as I said, is the head of impact development here at Seismic. She supports our clients on their upcoming sustainability and impact needs. And this really means that Ro needs to keep on top of the changing demands on businesses that arise from regulation, and translates those needs into bespoke support for our clients across all of our services of B Corp, ESG, net zero. And that includes things like TCFD and CSRD. So there we go. I've already thrown out a bunch of acronyms. And Ro's experience of managing ESG data reporting herself, working 20 years in-house in commercial and ESG roles, really means that she's moved through the journey and the landscape as it's changed, and then moved into consultancy, and is now obviously here with us at Seismic. And she applies, those many years of experience in supporting clients across different sectors to identify their sustainability requirements. And she has a particular passion for reporting and disclosure, which is what she's going to share with you today. If you've noted your poll, Ro's going to share some feedback for us now. And I'm going to hand over to Ro, and I will see you all later for our Q&A at the end. So just a last reminder to pop any questions in as you go. Handing over to you, Ro.
Thank you so much, Olivia. It's wonderful to be with you this morning and to talk about frameworks, reporting and disclosures, why those are important, and help to simplify. Just looking at the poll results, I can see that there's quite a mix of different results there of what we were thinking. Some early stage, confused, where to start. Some developing, mostly reactive, and I can see some mature, proactive, and extracting value. And we expect that from everybody to be at different stages of journey. And we can really see that there's quite a lot of people that are at that early stage, really trying to understand what's important to you, what's important to your business, and how to make that meaningful. And we hope today, that today this webinar is going to give you a little bit more comfort, because at Seismic we recognise that everyone is at a different stage of their sustainability journey. And today we're going to take it at a really manageable pace. We love helping our clients turn risk into impact and better business. This means that reporting and disclosure for you and for your business needs to be manageable and calm, with a clear route forward. As Olivia says, it's very broad. It's just impossible to cover everything on this diverse topic, especially in just a 1 hour session. So we're not even going to try to do that today. To be frank, we also think it's not helpful. Instead, during this briefing, we're going to be touching on the most important and the most relevant to the majority of businesses attending today. And we promise at the end, you're going to know the acronyms for the key ones, and we're going to keep it simple. As Olivia said, our commitment is to clarify and demystify reporting and disclosure. And at all times, we're going to be using clear language and explanations in a human-first approach. And we're going to do that by starting with sharing why frameworks are important. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with this quote, "What gets measured gets done." And it's often attributed to the strategy guru, Peter Drucker. But I personally remember it from an admired leader during my in-house days who would use this phrase daily to drive improvements in commercial results by measuring and tracking progress towards a specific goal. By keeping the eyes of the team on progress, people are much more likely to take action and make necessary changes to achieve goals. And that's what we're trying to achieve within Impact. It's exactly the same for sustainability disclosure and reporting. As a B Corp ourselves, and with our support of close to almost 800 B impact assessments now, we know that having a framework that measures impact, it really works to ensure a broad area of action across environmental, social, and governance areas. But building further on this, we know from our work with our clients that what gets reported grows positive impact. And we find that those companies who take a proactive approach to reporting, whether that's with the voluntary frameworks like B Corp and certifications like science-based targets, or have started early in their mandatory reporting preparation, like with the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, they are really able to grow their positive impact and reduce their negative impacts. And these companies recognize that reporting enables people to see what's important and identify early how to turn risk into impact and better business. So drilling into this a little bit further, frameworks, reporting and disclosure are important because they are a mechanism to increase trust and transparency across multiple stakeholder groups. And we all have something that simplifies that messaging across the many different stakeholder groups that you have. They demonstrate impact, performance, and progress using data measurement and management. Very quantifiable and very easy to be able to see improvements and results. And reporting ensures compliance with mandatory regulations and legislation. They enable better business and bring a lot of value, especially commercial value, through increased stakeholder engagement. For example, good reporting foundations include the efficient collation of premium investor-grade relevant data. They improve resilience, reducing the risk of non-compliance and supporting better risk management of climate and societal risks. And they allow for opportunity identification and transformation, using reporting and disclosure as a critical lever to transform business through investment or operating model changes. If we dig into those business benefits just a little bit more, here's some recent research which proves this. According to CEO interviews recently conducted, 69% of CEOs see significant stakeholder demand for increased transparency and reporting on ESG matters, and it's only increasing. Stakeholders are demanding more and more data. Reporting also supports better identification of risk and mitigation, allowing for increased resilience, especially on climate. Climate risks will increasingly be a significant cost to business. Over the last 20 years, the world has seen an average of 115 billion costs per year caused by the climate crisis through extreme weather like storms, floods, and heat waves. And finally, which I find quite exciting in linking to commercial growth, reporting supports growth and transformation opportunities through investment, allowing investors to make quicker and easier decisions. Results for recent global investor surveys showed that 57% of investors, almost 60%, say companies meeting regulation and standards, including the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, or International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, would meet their information needs for decision making to a large or very large extent. And we're going to prep you today on the CSRD and the ISSB. And we see this from our clients. We really love working with companies who continuously look to improve their transparency and trust using frameworks. And here is an example from one of our clients, Innocent, who've been using the B Corp framework to demonstrate their impact and progress. We've really enjoyed working with Innocent on their journey and supporting them on their ongoing steps. So we now know why frameworks, reporting standards are important, but how do you select the right ones to use? The landscape is huge and it's constantly evolving. And there's been a rapid increase in regulations and standards. In fact, over the last 5 years, they have doubled, and there are now over 600 different ESG reporting provisions in place. There are so many reporting standards out there that is commonly referred to the alphabet soup of reporting, and they represent many, many acronyms, and we don't expect everybody to know them. We don't know them all always. We're trying to get to know them as they evolve. But what we have done on this page is group some of the main reporting standards and frameworks that may impact your business depending on different factors. And you'll recognize B Corp in the center as a framework and a certification, which we have already discussed. On the left-hand side, there are reporting standards and directives that are already regulation or they're informing mandatory regulation, like the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive just mentioned, which we will be covering later, and other regulations impacting specific sectors, such as the SFDR, the Sustainability Financial Disclosure Regulation at the bottom left, which is relevant for all financial market participants. In the middle are frameworks and disclosures and a mix of voluntary and mandatory, such as the science-based targets, where companies have declared greenhouse gas emission reduction goals and pathways, and those that have been already incorporated and adopted into mandatory regulation, such as the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. Now, these often depend on revenue and headcount thresholds, whether or not they are mandatory applicable. And they do result in mandatory disclosures on certain risks and opportunities. And finally, on the right-hand side, there are frameworks and certifications and ratings that provide impact management and performance assessment that resonate with different stakeholder groups, such as the CDP in red, the Carbon Disclosure Project, which manages environmental impacts across climate, deforestation, and water insecurity, and also groupings of ESG rating agencies, such as MSCI, ISS ESG, and Sustainalytics, which measure a company's resilience to long-term financially relevant ESG risks. It's a lot. We recognize that. With all of this alphabet soup, how do you choose what to report against? Each one seems to have different requirements, different focus areas, standards, and scoring methodologies. And selecting too many can lead to confusion and overburdened reporting versus focus on improving sustainability through initiatives. So our recommendation is to focus on 6 key areas. The first one is to clearly determine what are your mandatory requirements, ensuring compliance. The second step is to understand and prioritize what is meaningful and material to your business. Nobody can do everything at once. So prioritize those that matter most to you and your stakeholders. Step 3 is setting your level of ambition and pace and moving towards that. The fourth is sector-based. Consider what's important to your sector, the industry best practice and standards that resonate for both benchmarking, your suppliers, your customers, and your consumers and employees. Our step 5 and step 6 relate to long-term impact and momentum, defining what reporting will support long-term impact and not just a near-term performance measure is important. And on this last step is ensuring the framework itself that you choose has momentum with the evolution of standards to improve sustainability performance, supporting continuous improvement for your business to drive impact and, importantly, commercial growth. Now, with all of these different frameworks, what we want to do is bring you some good news today. Yes, the alphabet soup of reporting has led to inconsistent and incomparable ESG standards, which can be difficult for stakeholders and especially for investors to understand different sustainability performance, especially across regions and sectors. But this good news today is that there is a movement towards one global baseline that can meet stakeholders' varied needs. And this is called the gold standard. The gold standard is the ISSB. the International Sustainability Standards Board, which was actually created back in 2021 at COP26 in Glasgow by the International Financial Reporting Standards, the IFRS. The ISSB responded to the need for consistent and comparable sustainability information to inform both the economic and investment decision, building on existing initiatives in an efficient manner, designed to deliver a truly global baseline of disclosures to inform financial markets, building on the current work of investor-focused reporting initiatives. This ISSB gold standard aims to align the reporting landscape and create efficiencies, with the ISSB committed to delivering standards that are cost-effective, decision-useful, and market-informed. And this chart here shows the evolution of the ISSB and the convergence of multiple standards. You can see from the top as it filters down. The ISSB has increased alignment in the reporting landscape by integrating the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, the SASB, which you can see on the top right, industry-specific disclosure standards across ESG topics, and is taking over the Taskforce on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure Responsibilities, the TCFD, as you can see from the left. And it's also known to be interoperable with Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, amongst other major global reporting standards. So this really is bringing together a much more coherent, consistent, comparable, and cost and time effective set of standards. If we explore a little bit more the initial ISB standards, so far there are 2 initial standards which were announced in June 2023 that are effective for annual reportings on or after the 1st of January 2024. And this means for those that are reporting to the ISSB, the first financial reports to use them will be published in 2025. Early use of the standards is allowed as long as both standards are used together and the company discloses that it is using them. The IFRS S1 relates to general requirements, and the second standard on the right relates to climate-related disclosures. Good news is that both fully incorporate the recommendations of the Taskforce on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, and the ISSB is currently considering and consulting on what the other standards may be needed. So they're looking at proposals including biodiversity, ecosystems, and human rights. Now, at the moment, this is not mandatory. For mandatory compliance, this all depends on the formal adoption of the standards international law. However, we are seeing countries like the UK, Australia, and Japan endorsing the ISSB and pledging to use the ISSB as the baseline for mandatory reporting from 2024 onwards. Now, this makes the future look a little less mysterious for corporate ESG reporting, and we do see this convergence of commercial and sustainability strategy and governance with a coming together of the financial, non-financial reporting and data management. The first mandatory reporting that we do know is within Europe, and this is the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which essentially has mostly the same requirements of the ISSB standards and the IFRS. And we're going to walk through some of the key elements and requirements of this important directive. The CSRD was informed by the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, the EFRAG, effective in January 2023. And was passed into EU legislation for annual reporting periods on or after the 1st of January 2024. Now, for those of you that know, this replaces the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, the NFRD, and is the result of the development of a harmonised set of sustainability reporting standards for companies operating in the EU. And companies that must comply with the CSRD must report against the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are known as the new grammar of sustainability reporting. The CSRD is anticipated to affect over 50,000 companies by 2027, and that includes SMEs, both in the EU and outside the EU. And this directive involves retrospective and forward-thinking reporting, considering over 1,000 different European SRS data points, which require digital tagging, and it's over 12 standards. Reporting is defined by affected stakeholders across the entire value chain, the double materiality of ESG impacts, and the formal inclusion in company reports, which will be audited by a third party, driving the need for a robust sustainability narrative and evidence sustainability claims and credentials. The first two cross-cutting standards, ESRS 1 and 2, they focus on general requirements, considering key stakeholders and reporting, and they are regardless of sector. But sector standards are coming. They are under development, with the first ones to be issued in 2026 or earlier. It's important to note that each member state of the EU will pass the CSRD into their own legislation, and that requires constant monitoring of the legal horizon and country-specific amendments of implications. Now, France was the first country to implement back in December 2023, and there are specifics such as criminal sanctions and liability for non-compliance, and a very clear description of different sized companies for France. One key area of the CSRD that underpins ESRS and also IFRS is the concept of double materiality. And this is a fundamental strategic activity and assessment that all companies can actually undertake now to be proactive and focus resources internally to support efficient reporting by engaging stakeholders in determining the most material ESG topics to and upon a business. In simple terms, double materiality is the consideration of a company's impact on sustainability matters, so an inside-out approach, and the sustainability matters financial impact on companies' development, performance, and position, an outside-in approach. By considering sustainability topics, an organization from more than one angle has a more holistic view of the risks and opportunity it faces. A key clarification point is that the CSRD requires all material matters to be identified in both the impact and financial materiality. And it's importantly, not those only in the intersection of impact and materiality. So finally, how do the ISSB, IFRS sustainability standards impact companies specifically based in the UK? The UK Sustainability Disclosure Standards set out corporate disclosures on risks and opportunities that companies face, including those from climate change. And they are to be created by July 2024 and are planning to come into effect by January 2025. And good news, the UK government has stated that the STS will be based on the IFRS standards issued by the ISSB and will only divert from the global baseline if absolutely necessary for UK-specific matters. So the headline here is that the countdown is ticking and there's less than 5 minutes to go. So let's take a breath and remember the good news. A global baseline has been created. There's greater interoperability between reporting standards, especially in the mandatory space, with most built upon existing frameworks and disclosures and core concepts such as double materiality. But what do you need to do practically to get reporting ready? And what are the key steps that businesses can take? Our recommendation is to take that big breath and lay out a clear roadmap in 3 key steps. The first step is to define your reporting requirements and desired framework. Undertake a review of your legislative landscape, your peer reporting and benchmarking in line with your stakeholder needs and expectations. And then complete a framework review to select the most meaningful disclosures, frameworks, and certifications in a mapping exercise, which will provide you with where your North Star of where you want to go is and how fast you need to get there. The second step is to really understand your current reporting and data. There's a lot of data, as you saw, with over those thousands of points. Completing a review of your reporting governance, resource, and processes, accompanied by a data audit, understanding current measurement, data completeness and accuracy, is going to provide you with your data and reporting baseline. From this robust position, the third step is to complete a gap analysis and readiness review, and between the requirements, frameworks, and current reporting data. And this will provide you with the roadmap on key steps that need to be taken to meet your ambitions and drive impact and value through reporting and disclosure. Now, it's important to know that that's not a point in time, it's a continuous process, and that the reporting and disclosure landscape is constantly evolving, as is your business. Your commercial strategy may impact your roadmap, bringing in new markets, stakeholders, or thresholds for mandatory reporting. And you need to keep a close eye to the horizon to ensure that you are keeping up to date in this fluid and dynamic environment. So I'd like to close this section with 3 key questions for you to take away, a nudge to move you forward on your reporting and disclosure journey. The first one is, do you know how holistic your current reporting is and data management? How big an activity is this going to be for your business? The second one is really to get a clear idea on your key mandatory dates and how fast you need to go to meet your stakeholder needs for transparency and value creation. And how long is that going to take to embed into governance and build organizational capabilities? And lastly, how can you keep even more informed of this ever-evolving landscape? It's just so important to keep a track of changes and new requirements, especially as those standards evolve towards each other. How do you get expert guidance and support to ensure that you are on the right track? The fantastic news is that by being on the webinar today, you have already taken a proactive approach to reporting and disclosures, and you hopefully have clearer information to guide you. And we've provided you some calm and assurance on key steps to take on your journey, specifically focusing on the ISSB, the CSRD, the SDS, and double materiality. So now we're going to be moving on to conversation with our inspiring panel. We're really happy to have so many interesting speakers here today, and also so many people online to ask questions. And we are encouraging you to drop questions into the audience Q&A. I'm delighted to introduce you today to our panelists, and we're just bringing them online at the moment. We have Mark Brown, Sustainability and Impact Manager at Motability Operations Limited. Motability Operations is the commercial entity helping over 700,000 disabled people across the UK access mobility solutions via the Motability scheme. Motability Operations is a purpose-led organisation that aims to deliver smart, sustainable solutions that advance customers' mobility in a fast-changing world. And Mark has been with the business for over 12 years and is responsible for leading the business's approach to impact and sustainability. Welcome, Mark. And we have Joe Fackler joining us who's the manager at the Impact Management Platform. The Impact Management Platform is a collaboration of the leading providers of sustainability standards and guidance that are coordinating efforts to mainstream the practice of impact management, what we've been discussing today. And Joe will share more about its origins and its aims further during our discussion. So welcome to Joe and to Mark. Really excited to welcome you here today. And I think we're going to really have a fantastic discussion, learning more about your journey and some of the things that you've learned along that journey. So if I can ask Mark first, can you please share some of your experience with reporting frameworks that you've used in your business and a little bit about why?
Yep. Good morning, Ro. Thank you very much for inviting me along this morning. I think a lot of what you presented there resonates with the journey over the last sort of 12 months or so for me. In terms of what we use currently, we're using compliance-wise, we're reporting against the SECR, and we're also doing the TCFD disclosures. Wider than that, we have just had our near-term science-based targets approved, and we're also working towards B Corp certification. So in context with B Corp, we've also reported in reference to the GRI. In terms of getting there, it was interesting you used the term alphabet soup. In my first exec update I gave, it positioned reporting and frameworks very much along the lines of alphabet spaghetti. There are a huge number out there, and I think the key is actually distilling it down to what's important to you and actually what you really need to report against and actually what works best for your business.
Yeah, that's so true, Mark. And you mentioned quite a few acronyms there, so you've chosen a few. It sounds like you're quite on your reporting journey already. Where would you describe yourself on that journey?
It was interesting, your poll at the start. If I had the ability to vote, I'd probably vote a 2, because I think we are mature in some areas, and we've made good advancement, particularly around things like regulatory compliance. But I'd say there was a lot of work for us still to do internally to develop our internal reporting. And I think also a theme that sort of you touched upon in the presentation is really about data and how you get the right information to be able to support the reporting against the various different frameworks.
Mark, thanks for being so open and for sharing your experience. It sounds like you've got a good understanding, and 2 is a great position to be in. A few bumps in the road, it sounds like, with the data and the challenges, and maybe we'll explore that a little bit more. I think it's really interesting to know, and I'm sure the rest of the attendees today would love to know, what are you prioritising right now?
Yeah, I mean, for us, CSRD doesn't apply because the nature of how we sit in terms of our business structure. However, I think it is important to look at these EU regulations and how it's evolving. Obviously, the ISSB will apply for us, so that's an important element. And for me, what tends to happen is that the EU regulations are adopted at some point in some form by UK regulators. So I would say, rather than just taking a view it doesn't apply, is actually look at what the essence of the reporting standards are actually trying to achieve, and thinking about how you can context that within your business. Because if you can get ahead of the game, I think that's a really good position to be in, but appreciate it's a big challenge for a lot of companies.
It sounds like that proactive approach is paying off in terms of people's understanding within the business, in terms of moving towards more commercial value that can be extracted, and also importantly for Motability operations, greater purpose and impact. So I'm sure people will be resonating with that and understanding kind of how do we get on board with that? How do we understand what's going on in the EU? How does that drive the UK or potentially other markets? And also, how do the different frameworks interact? Joe, thank you for joining us. You were recently in Davos in one of the roles that you were there at the World Economic Forum, which was to convene different partners of the impact management platform. What do you see to be the key issues on the collective radar at the moment?
Happy to talk you through that, and thank you so much for having me today. Perhaps just to clarify exactly what the platform and specifically the partners of the platform are trying to do first. And thank you so much for bringing up that slide. So as Ro just mentioned earlier, so the platform is a collaboration between 19 international leading providers of sustainability standards and guidance. And together they're working together to firstly clarify what impact management really is. And maybe I should just throw out a quick definition here in the spirit of clarity and transparency. So the partners, these organizations here, have defined impact management as the process by which an organization understands, acts on, and communicates, in other words, report, disclosure, etc., how they understand, act on, and communicate their impacts on people and the planet with the ultimate goal to increase the positive impacts, reduce the negative, and ultimately to achieve sustainability and to promote well-being. They're doing that by also working towards this clearer system of resources. So that all-important word interoperability is something that these organizations together are really striving towards. And they are also looking to coordinate dialogue with policymakers as appropriate. So that's just a little bit about what we're doing. But yes, as you mentioned, there were several leaders of these organizations that were in Davos just last month. And so you will all be aware that Davos is a key opportunity to bring together business leaders to help advance sustainability solutions together. So many of the leaders of these partners were there. And so we decided to host a roundtable with them and other key stakeholders who are linked to the platform in some way to really host an open, a frank discussion about what is needed. And we wanted everybody in the room to be speaking, because it's important that we have, for this level of systemic change, that we have all of the right people and all of the and such a diverse range of people at the table. And so, if I may, just a few of the key discussion points that were highlighted there. First was the need to collaborate as a group of international standard setters. So this is, of course, in response to calls for further clarity around their content, such as what you've been discussing today, but also really to demonstrate their unitedness and their commitment. You know, I think that sustainability and impact management is something that has had a lot of attention in certainly in the last few years, but this is all in the backdrop of quite a volatile political and economic backdrop where sustainability issues might not be so prioritized. That being said, that's something that, you know, we need to strive to really ensure that we're making the case for that. And so that's why this collaboration is so important. I think secondly, there was a lot of emphasis on prioritizing the alignment of the disclosure standards, so particularly what our focus is today, with also the practice frameworks and standards. So really, how do you manage your impact? How is that done? And I think this is really important because, as Mark said, there's so much out there. You saw all of the logos on that slide. And the risk is that, Ro, as you were saying, that there is this risk of overwhelm and what we also call cost to compliance. One final point that I'd just like to share is that the partners agreed that if we want to make this concept of impact management a mainstream process, it is a multi-stakeholder effort. So of course, there's a lot of emphasis here that weighs on the partners, but on ourselves as practitioners, policymakers, governments, intermediaries, CSOs. This is all about aligning best practices and speaking with a common language. And that is something that the partners are really trying to do in their efforts together.
Thank you, Jo. It's so great to hear that desire, the drive, the activity towards that common standards and language. We get that request from a lot of businesses to kind of simplify, and it's really encouraging to hear that is really moving towards it, and most importantly, to increase positive impact. That's an amazing thing to see. So, based on the discussions that you were hearing, where do you feel that companies are in their mandatory reporting requirements at the moment?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it really depends. And it depends so much on how far along a company is towards understanding its impact performance. It also is going to very much depend at this point in time what is required of you in terms of the mandatory requirements. It depends on where you're based, on how, on the size of your organization as well. Regardless, I would say that if a company is already starting to collect some sort of sustainability related data, they're already off to a really, really good start. And that is because, by gathering data that is in accordance or in compliance with, say, some of the voluntary standard setters that are already out there, we're seeing, as you alluded to, this evidence that there is much closer alignment with the mandatory reporting requirements. So ISSB and CSRD, you obviously mentioned, there are so many promising signs of where there is good alignment. You mentioned the TCFD, Taskforce on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. They have their 4 pillars of governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. That same structure is true for the TNFD, so the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And the ISSB has ensured that they are building off that structure. So already, when you're thinking about your financial materiality and how you present that data, there is really strong alignment there. Also on the double materiality side, we know that there is a memorandum of understanding with the Global Reporting Initiative. There is indeed been close collaboration between the EU and EFRAG and also ISSB over the last few years. Only just a couple of months ago, the GRI published their interoperability index to see where there is a good degree of alignment between the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the ESRS, and the GRI standards as well. And there are other voluntary standard setters, I should say, that are also seeking alignment. I know that you mentioned CDP, BLAB as well, that is one such organization that is striving towards closer interoperability with both those 2 different standards that I mentioned.
That's really, really encouraging to hear. We certainly see that as well. We're in the knee, kind of into the weeds, looking at the interoperability and the mapping between GRI, as you said, in terms of kind of the different standards as well. And it's really encouraging to see that is happening, and we can do it in reality as well. So it provides a guidance and a pathway. There is a lot of data behind that, and I think I'd like to drill down a little bit more into that one, because Mark, you mentioned that earlier as one of your learnings from your reporting journey. Is that your biggest challenge? Can you share a little bit more about that in terms of your reporting journey?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think data certainly is a challenge, particularly when you look at trying to understand what your value chains are, who are the third parties that you're working with, particularly when you're looking at things like your carbon footprint and trying to create initiatives and plans for carbon reduction. I would say that I think it will improve over time as companies start to mature, but I think because lots of companies are on different stages of the journey, it's quite challenging. For us as an organization, we work with a large number of main manufacturers, and trying to get information about the manufacturing supply chain is very, very challenging. But I think over time, as companies mature their approach, that will become easier. I think the other big challenge is actually how you go about integrating it as part of your business. As once you've navigated through the plethora of standards and frameworks and work out what actually are the ones that are relevant for you, it's then about how do you then integrate that into the business. And I think your slide earlier, Ro, around sort of the six steps to try and demonstrate the value to the business, I think is quite key. Because I think some businesses can have a concept that this is tomorrow's problem, whereas the way I position this is actually it's yesterday's problem, and therefore we need to try and address this now and try and get a clear view of where we are, so we can set the plan and direction in terms of how we move forward as a business. And it should be a fundamental part of your strategy. It shouldn't be seen as something that just sits alongside what you do as a business. So those are sort of the key things that I've sort of worked on over the last 12, 18 months to try and really establish this as a priority within the business to be seen as part of our strategy.
Thank you, Mark. And it's great to see that interlink between, and more than interlink, but kind of the really embedded of the commercial strategy with the ESG strategy. You've obviously done a lot inside the organisation to really embed. How have you done that? How have you achieved that successful communication as well as the business case? What else have you done to achieve that?
I think for me, it's very much a sort of a top-down, bottom-up approach. I think one of the real big movement of the dial for us was performing the materiality assessment. So going out and talking to all of our key stakeholders, getting their views, getting their opinions, because sometimes it's easy for you looking sort of internally to say, well, we think we know where all the big challenges are and the big challenge areas, but actually until you've done that process, it does actually open your eyes to actually some of the challenges that maybe some of your suppliers face, or actually the attitudes in terms of what your customers think are important to them. So that really does help inform not just in terms of sustainability reporting, but also then initiatives and strategies you go forward. So for me, it's a really, really valuable exercise for us to do. I think the other key point is around really sort of working out how does your sustainability approach then sort of embed itself as part of that business strategy. So for us, we've made sure that impact and sustainability goes across everything we do. So it's a consideration in what we do. It's also about translating it in context for your business, because I think is today we're checking lots of acronyms around. It's about how do you engage your business within your sustainability approach. So most employees will not have a clue what ESG is. So how do you translate that into something that's more meaningful for the business and help everybody understand how do they play their part? And then that then sort of leverages then more internal buying, and you're then able to sort of access more information, more data, which is really valuable in terms of building that basis for which then you can report. But more importantly for me is once you've established the baseline, is actually what are you going to do to shift that baseline to make sure that actually as a business you really are sort of moving towards that purposeful improvement in actually what impact you have, both in terms of environment, social, but also making sure you're well controlled and well managed.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. I think we've got a wealth, so many questions that we could ask you, but it's only right that we open up the floor to the audience. And I think Olivia is going to help consolidate the questions and ask some further questions. Thank you so much, Joe and Mark, for your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was really helpful and insightful. And I think from the comments we've had in the chat and the many questions, it's really shown that this is a topic that people are desperate for clarity on. We have 10 more minutes left in this session, which we wanted to open up to the floor and questions. So if people have more, put them in. I doubt we'll be able to get through them all, and we will do our best to respond to you directly for those that we don't get to. I've got a few of them here, so I'm just going to ask them to the three of you, and if you could jump forward with any responses, that would be great. We've had a lot of questions on CSRD, so I'm going to go to that first. The first was from Natalie Ritchie, which a few of them have been about the UK specific, how it's going to translate from the EU directive to the UK. So firstly, how do we think how quickly and how will it be adopted in the UK? And within that, there's some questions around materiality, which I think has come up a lot, and doing that double materiality in advance to be ready. So if you're able to share when we think that it's likely to translate through to the UK and what that means, and then thoughts on how soon to consider double materiality for your business. Anyone like to give some thoughts on that?
I'll pick up on the materiality point. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think materiality is very, very valuable. The other thing I would say is if you've not done materiality before, it can be quite a daunting process. So this is not a shameless plug, but obviously we engaged with Seismic to really sort of help us understand what does a materiality assessment and a double materiality assessment look for. And I think Joe raised a point earlier around that sort of collaboration point. I think it's really, really important to look at what other companies are doing, who are seen as best practice in this space, and really learn from them, because this is probably the one unique area in business where actually we can learn from each other. Whereas, historically businesses have always competed for that edge. My philosophy in this space is there's no point being a single hero, because we all need to work together and learn together and develop that. So I think the materiality assessment is probably the key bit. And then essentially it's about how do you then use that information to then create your approach that then aligns to those CSRD requirements. And fundamentally, most of this stuff is based in how are you managing risk and how are you managing your environmental and social impact. That would be my thoughts.
Thank you, Mark. That's really helpful. I think double materiality is in itself a whole huge area to explore, but gives an enormous amount of insight for more than just CSRD, for example. It actually gives you perspective from all of your stakeholders on the various frameworks that you should consider. Any thoughts perhaps from Joe or Ro on its integration into the UK and timings around that? Joe.
I'm happy to jump in. I don't have an awful lot of detail in terms of how it will be, to what stage, at what point it will be adopted into the UK. I know that there is an endorsement process that will be kicking off in the summer, and then how that sort of rolls out from then. I'm afraid I'm not super clear on the timelines, but I'm sure if they're not already published, they will be very soon, and with that summer date in mind. I think also just building on what Mark was saying, though, about the materiality process, I can't emphasize this enough. I think, what we've been really working with the partners on in the last year or so is really making that case for why your materiality assessments, really understanding your impact on stakeholders, is so important. And that is because of the recognition, and I hope this really kind of brings together what many people have said so far today, is that impact topics, sustainability topics are very much embedded in how we run our businesses and in our environmental and societal systems. And so understanding which of your material issues may have an effect on your business, perhaps in the long term, is so important, because it helps you think about the resilience of your business in the now. And so I think that this is your materiality assessment, the sooner you can do it, the better, because you are having a much keener insight on how your organization is running, and even if there are these sustainability topics that aren't having an effect on you right now, they may well do over time.
Yeah, and I would love to build on that. I think also there's a huge amount of commercial value. I'm always going back to it in terms of identifying really what those material matters are, because it helps you really focus your resources and identify new opportunities for value creation, as well as understanding the impact on the different stakeholders. And just returning to the timeline for the UK, we explained about the SDS and what's coming in summer. We're all keeping an eye on it. There's lots of other things going on in the UK political environment as well. But overall, what we have seen by new legislation coming in is that implementation times are getting faster and faster. So TCFD, TNFD, I didn't mention TPT, which is Taskforce for Transition Planning. And these things are anticipated to be implemented a lot faster than prior legislation. And that's really the message to get across, is that your runway is shortening in terms of preparation. So when we expect to get that news and information, we expect to get probably a faster rate of implementation as well.
Thank you, Ro. We've had a lot of questions that are sector specific. Obviously, people hear all of these acronyms and wonder if they apply specifically to them. And I thought rather than ask those specific questions, I will just flag what they are. Where can people go to find this out? So we've had from Christina Cartel a question about SME European entities, so finding out about headcount and revenue and whether or not CSRD applies to you. We've had a question from David Brunt about CSRD and ISSB and whether or not it applies to publicly listed companies in terms of that mandatory reporting. And then we've also had a question from Rael Jane about whether or not these frameworks apply to higher education institutions. So you can see here people are immediately thinking about their business, their sector, what's relevant to them. If you've got any quick answers to those, do share. But otherwise, like where can people go to better understand what applies to them and what they need to start thinking about?
I'm happy to just pick up on this one. It's not one-stop shop. I think that's the hard thing, because the CSRD itself is a directive that was put into legislation, and it did have concepts around the different types of companies, around large listed companies, public companies, and then a timeline towards SMEs by the end of this decade and earlier in terms of the timelines. However, it's how it gets applied into local law is really the defining element here. And this is where we're seeing a divergence, and I would say more of an increase and inclusion of different size companies within different markets. So for example, depending on where a country's sustainability journey is on, they are using as you would do, right, this tool, this vehicle, to have a broader impact of where they want to do that. And so, for example, we're seeing some markets like the Nordics trying to move with much faster and broader implementation. So bringing in a lot of SMEs a lot earlier, for example. So unfortunately, I can't give a specific, dead answer for all of those. What we would recommend is speaking to an expert, getting an understanding of the different mandatory frameworks that are relevant for you and really drilling down into that information. I wish there was a one-stop shop. We're trying to think about how do we do that for our clients effectively and easily, because that's what we're always trying to do. And so we'll be starting to offer some kind of mini consultations just to kind of go through some of those key threshold requirements, markets, where you are, revenues, etc., just so we can understand and to provide some initial guidance before digging deeper.
Thanks,
Joe or Mark, anything else to add to that one?
I am aware that CSRD is requiring publicly listed companies to report. Yes, that would be very much in scope, as well as large companies as well. And of course, the SME guidance is just coming out. So yes, this is going to be affecting a huge amount of organisations, as Ro pointed out in her presentation.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, and I would say from my experience, it's always easy to think that you're in a worse place than everyone else, whereas in reality, I think we're all trying to find our way through. And even if you just reflect on the last 12 months, there's been a huge amount of change in regulation. With sort of the S1 and S2 sort of coming into force. So I think the key is actually is to keep collaborating and to keep talking to people within your industry, expertise, consultancy. If you can really go that route, I would really highly recommend it, because what it helps you do is actually helps clarify where you are. And actually, the reality is, if you're making some concerted effort here, you're already, as Joe said earlier, you're already a good start. It's about actually then understanding where are your gaps and what do you need to address, and actually then selling to your businesses around that. This isn't just about sustainability at the cost of something else. Actually, this has a large commercial value for us as an organisation, and we really should be embracing it, because this is really the way the future of all businesses need to go if we're all going to come together to really sort of make a difference.
Mark, you couldn't have put it better if I'd tried. And so thank you. That actually concludes it really helpfully. This is a complex world. It changes regularly. Just by being here on this webinar shows you're trying to keep abreast of it, speak to experts, join communities. That's how you will best understand it. I'm going to close us off there, thanking our panel hugely for joining us. I really appreciate it. And to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found it valuable. You can see here on the screen our next breakfast briefing session, one of these frameworks, B Corp. It is B Corp month next month, and we'll be hosting a breakfast briefing on the theme for B Corp month, which is this way forward, with businesses going beyond using the B Corp framework. So do join us. And I hope you found that helpful. Do find us on LinkedIn and ask any further questions of our lovely panel members, Joe, Mark and Ro. And thank you very much for joining us today, everybody, and have a good rest of your day. I hope it was informative. Thanks very much and goodbye.